So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our virtual Ambassadors Roundtable with our guest this afternoon, Ambassador Margaret, or better known as Meg Whitman, whom it's my pleasure to introduce today. Philip Hughes, actually newly elevated to the post of President of the Council of American Ambassadors. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this talk. A few years ago, we inaugurated a series of roundtables like this conducted over Zoom to account for everyone's various whereabouts for new members of the council, newly returned ambassadors coming in from their posts to give them a chance to get acquainted with our members and give a debriefing on the conclusion of their mission. Enables us to not only get to know them, but also to get to know more about the work that they accomplished in the field, like we all did in our respective times in this occupation. Let me briefly introduce Ambassador Whitman, and then I'll turn the floor over to her to begin her debriefing. And I know there are already questions that have come in via chat or text, and then we'll also have a chance to ask our questions live in streaming with Ambassador Whitman. Before Ambassador Whitman was confirmed unanimously, interestingly, by the Senate on July 14th of 2022 as President Biden's ambassador to Kenya. Her service extended from August of 22 until November of 24, just a bit after the election. Before all of that public service, she was and is a legendary and prominent American businesswoman. Without rehearsing her entire and lengthy business career, she was notably a president and CEO of eBay for 10 years, from 1998 to 2008, during which time she took the company from 30 employees and $4 million in revenue to 15,000 employees and $8 billion in revenue. After which, from 2011 to 2015, she was president and CEO of Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Hewlett-Packard Company, during which she led the company through an important split that gives us the company's profile as we know it today. Ambassador Whitman has been a member of a number of corporate boards, including Procter and Gamble and General Motors. She is a national board chair, or the national board chair, of Teach for America, which many of us know as this remarkable initiative that gets the very best and brightest students in front of classrooms teaching American kids as part of their or sequel to their immediate undergraduate education. She's a member as well of the Board of Trustees of the Nature Conservancy. She's married to a noted neurosurgeon, Dr. Griffith Harsh, whom she was just telling me has taken the chair of neurosurgery at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and they divide their time between Albuquerque and their home in Colorado. With 2 grown sons and now 3 grandchildren, Meg Whitman has her MBA from the Harvard Business School and an AB from Princeton. And maybe most notable for the purposes of our council, she is also the winner of the 2024 Ambassador Sue Cobb Award for the Outstanding Non-Career Ambassador. And for that, we are, of course, very proud of Ambassador Whitman, who's now a new member. So with that, Ambassador Whitman, we're looking forward to hearing from you about your mission in Nairobi and to entertaining our questions.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ambassador Hughes. And I'm grateful to the Council of American Ambassadors for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be part of your group. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I ever be a member of the Council of American Ambassadors, I would have said, I don't think so. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for welcoming me. So I thought I'd start with a little story. Everyone always asks me, how did I end up as the ambassador to Kenya? Because as Ambassador Hughes noted, I am not a career Foreign Service officer. I am a political or was a political appointee. So some of you may not know this. I ran for governor of California as a Republican in 2010. I lost to Jerry Brown. But when Donald Trump received the nomination of the Republican Party in 2016, I actually left the party and tried to help Hillary Clinton and then ultimately Joe Biden. And so when I got a call 6 months after Biden had taken the presidency, he called me and he said, Meg, I'd like you to be an ambassador. And before I could say anything, he said, and I want you to go to Kenya. I didn't say it, but I was thinking, Kenya? I don't know. What about France? And he said, the reason I want you to go to Kenya is the tech capital of East Africa, should be the tech capital of all of the continent. And if we send someone like you to Kenya, it will signify the importance that our administration places on Africa. So I thought that was a pretty compelling thing. And he also mentioned one very important fact. He said, Meg, Africa is going to be so important because 1 in 4 people on Earth are going to live on the African continent in 2050. 1 in 3 working age people are going to live on the African continent. So we need to get ourselves together around how we can be of help to Africa and be an influence there. And as you know, China, half the battle in life is showing up. And China has shown up in Africa for 20 years, and we're relatively now just showing up, and we'll see if we take a big step back. So I turned to my husband, who was a neurosurgeon. He was the chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery at UC Davis in Sacramento, California. And I said, Hun, what do you think? And he said, you know what? Life for us at this juncture is about experiences. And this will be a really interesting experience because we had never lived outside the United States. We'd never obviously lived in a developing country. I'd never worked for the United States government. So we figured just with that alone, this would be very interesting. So I was confirmed after a very long confirmation process in the middle of July of 2022, and we arrived on August 1st of 2022 into Nairobi. And when we got off the plane, we looked at each other and said, do you know that we do not know a single person in this entire country? Nobody. But it was a remarkable, remarkable experience. I think that changed both of our lives. And I learned a tremendous amount, and I'll hit on some of these points in a moment. But it was a remarkable, remarkable experience. And I learned so much every single day, and it was really a privilege and an honor to serve. And my husband also got to he had got an appointment at Jomo Kenyatta University, as well as the University of Nairobi. He did not operate, but he taught 54 residents over the 2.5 years that we were there. So it was great for both of us. So when I first got there, I understood the breadth of the mission in Nairobi. Nairobi is the 10th or 11th largest mission in the world. Huge number of employees and their families, but all 36 government agencies have a position in Nairobi. So everything from obviously USAID to DOD to CDC, Walter Reed Army Medical Center, you name it, it's all there. So I had like a little baby United States government there, and that was fascinating in and of itself. So the first thing I sort of understood was how broad the mission was. And I said, you know what? I'm here for just a few years. And what could we really focus on? What was absolutely critical? I'm a big believer. Could we please do 3 things really well as opposed to do many, many things? And so obviously things would continue. But the 3 things that we collectively with my leadership team decided to focus on was first and foremost visas. You might recall every embassy in the world had very long visa wait times because of COVID, when there was no demand for visas, and all those consular officers sort of disappeared into other parts of the US government, and some left. And we had a 2-year wait to get an interview for visas for Kenyans. And that was overshadowing all the good work that we were doing. I would go talk about famine relief or all kinds of good things that the mission did. And the Kenyans would say, yeah, but we can't get a visa. We can't get a visa interview. So like, what are you doing? So that was job number 1. And we really employed a business technique, which was, first of all, process re-engineering, where we've got focus on having people focus on only issuing a certain kind of visa. So the throughput was first. We got some more people. And then, as all of you know, if you are only 5 years in the Foreign Service, you still have a consular officer, you can still be a consular officer. So I said to all the people who were 5 years and less in the Foreign Service, I said, it's your lucky day. You get to come back and be a consular officer until we figure this out, until we can get the wait times down. And then I also went down myself, and I couldn't obviously do interviews, but I did fingerprinting and all kinds of things. So after about 3 months, we were down to 3 months of wait, which was a big win for the embassy and frankly for America in Kenya. The second thing is I arrived in the fourth year of failed rains in Kenya. As all of you know who have served in Africa, climate change is affecting African nations more than it is almost any place else because they don't have the resiliency, they don't have the backup systems that we have in other developed countries. And 2.5 million of their 7.5 million cows had died. And as you know, in many African countries, cows is the sign of wealth. So the first thing I said is we have got to make sure that we do everything we can to mitigate the famine and the hunger situation that was very acute at the time. You also may know that Kenya has two refugee camps, Kakuma and Dadaab, that together hold about 750,000 refugees, and the hunger situation there was very acute. So we really focused on how do we make sure that we get this cash and food relief to the right people at the right time as fast as humanly possible, because lives were on the line. And I have to say, USAID did a remarkable job of stepping up to the plate alongside World Food Program to really step up the speed and effectiveness of our deliveries, which were pretty good, but needed to be even better. And then my third priority was all about economic growth and development. What I figured out pretty quickly was the number one challenge facing Kenya is jobs. This is a country that's growing very rapidly. In 1980, Kenya had 16 million people. Today, it has 52 million people, on its way potentially to 110 million people by 2025. And so every year, there's a million new 18-year-olds who don't get the kind of jobs that they need to support themselves and their families. So I decided, given my background, that economic growth and development was going to be the third leg of what I really, really focused on. And so we set about trying to diagnose the problem. And effectively, for foreign direct investment, which is going to be absolutely crucial to the industrialization of a country like Kenya, we had to change the narrative on Africa and the narrative on Kenya, particularly for American businesses. So let me give you an example. When I was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, and the CEO of eBay, I thought about Africa like 1% of my time. Lots going on in America, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa seemed like a long way away. And I wasn't really focused on what had happened in Africa over the last 20 years. A lot of the narrative, frankly, in America for Africa is, how we were all raised and our mothers said, eat all the food on your plate because there are starving children in Africa. Well, that's the narrative of so many Americans have of Africa. So we said, well, listen, what can we do here that would be helpful to change the narrative? So we put together a presentation that we called Why Africa, Why Kenya? Why you should invest in Africa and why Kenya should be your leading destination. And we unveiled this at the American Chamber of Commerce conference in March of 2023 to remarkable acclaim. I mean, Kenyans came up to me and said, we didn't even know this about Kenya and why this was such a great investment destination. We took it on the road. We piloted. I don't usually pilot things in New York, but that's where we were. So we went to New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and LA. I took the president of Kenya to Silicon Valley, to San Francisco, and to LA. He'd never been to Silicon Valley. And then, of course, this culminated in the President Ruto's state visit in May of 2024. And this was a remarkable partnership between the American Embassy and President Ruto. Sometimes in life, it's better to be lucky than smart. And I was lucky because I was new. I arrived on August 1st. He was elected on August 9th of 2022. And he was the first president of Kenya to be born after independence and the first non-elite. Most of the presidents of Kenya, as some of you may know, were either the revolutionaries who broke away from Britain in 1964 or their sons. And he was not attached to that. He was the vice president to President Uhuru Kenyatta, but he wasn't an elite. He was a chicken farmer. His family was chicken farmers. He didn't have his first pair of shoes until he was 12. So he was all about economic growth and development because he understood that with this population boom, unless they created more jobs faster, that this was going to be a big problem. So we, I think, did a good job of changing the narrative and then began company recruitment in a very major way. And we focused on four sectors. First was technology. I'm a big believer in doubling down on what you do well. And President Biden was right when he told me that Kenya was the tech capital of East Africa. And the reason they are is there's a product there called M-Pesa, which is the largest mobile wallet in the world. And everyone has an M-Pesa account. Everyone is banked effectively because of that M-Pesa account. And catch this, 70% of Kenya's GDP goes through M-Pesa. And so it is a very technology forward country that has spun off lots of fintech, e-commerce companies because of the success of M-Pesa. And so technology was one. And then number two was agriculture, the modernization of agriculture. 70% of the GDP is agriculture. It can no longer rely on rain-fed irrigation because of climate change. So we did a lot of work around bringing back certain crops like pyrethrum, like avocados, like cotton, and worked on cold storage and food processing, as well as making sure that we did as much as we could around mitigating the effects of just rain-fed irrigation. And number three was manufacturing, and we focused on apparel manufacturing. But I'll tell you an interesting story. When I first got there, many people said, Meg, this is an agricultural economy with a digital footprint, M-Pesa. Maybe you can just go from agriculture to digital and skip manufacturing. And I spent about a day thinking about this, and there's no way that can happen because digital companies like eBay, like Google, like Microsoft, et cetera, have a very low number of employees per dollar of revenue relative to a manufacturing facility. And so you can bring all the tech companies you want, and it will not be enough jobs for enough people in Kenya. So what we did is we said, what are the big employers of people? And number one is apparel. And so we really made a big push on apparel. And because of AGOA, this was very attractive to apparel manufacturers. We can discuss what's going to happen with AGOA. But so that we created almost 500,000 jobs there. And then last but not least was tourism. Again, doubling down on a strength. Tourism is 10% of the GDP. It could be 20, not cannibalizing anything else. And so we really worked hard on a tourism strategy that could yield a lot of jobs very rapidly. So the pitch to American companies, if I go all the way back up, was this, and this worked every time. Every company needs to diversify their supply chain. What we learned when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and when, what's going on in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, what's going on in China, is you can no longer have a concentrated supply chain as big American companies. You have to diversify that supply chain. And if you're going to diversify the supply chain, you might as well go to a country that is English speaking with a great workforce who's hungry and wants to work in a country that has 93% green energy. So therefore you can get to your scope 2, scope 3 emissions goals. That was the elevator pitch, and it worked every time. I mean, it was really quite amazing what we were able to do. And just to give you a couple of stats on venture capital, when I got there, we were number 5, I think, on the continent in terms of attracting venture capital to the tech sector. 3 years later, because of this, we were the number 1 destination. Kenya was the number 1 destination for startup capital on the continent, bigger than Nigeria, bigger than South Africa, and actually bigger than Egypt, because of what we did around telling people the narrative and the success of tech companies there. So lots of other things around that we did, and obviously all the good work of the CDC and other parts of USAID continued, but those are the 3 things that I focused on. And it was a remarkable experience, one I wouldn't trade for anything. And I admire the career foreign service officers on this call, because what you have done with your career to represent the United States, to highlight America's role in the world, and do things that are very good for America and very good for our host countries. I was deeply impressed, and I didn't really have an understanding of what you all had done before I became an ambassador. So thank you. And we can go to questions on any subject. You might recall I ran for public office, so nothing hurts my feelings.
Um, well, Ambassador Whitman, thank you very much. That is a marvelous, focused, succinct, and informative explanation of your mission. I'm glad we're recording this because I teach a course in diplomacy, and I'm thinking now that your presentation is going to become part of our perhaps snippets of it, perhaps the whole thing, part
You're very
of
nice. Thank you.
discussion we do on the role of the ambassador. But I see that Ambassador Jim Gilmore has his hand up. Perhaps can Jim join the conversation, Grace?
Yes, Ambassador Bliss asked a question first. If we could, he sent it
Sure, we can do
in the
that.
chat. His question to Ambassador Whitman is, what is the status of USAID programs in Kenya? And then, yes, I'll bring Ambassador Gilmore up.
Yeah. So I suspect that many of you share my deep concern about what has happened to USAID. USAID has been devastated in Kenya. And like most African countries, the number one beneficiary was, or the number one program was PEPFAR, which is the anti-HIV/AIDS President Bush did 20 years ago, that I think, frankly, has probably been the most successful U.S. humanitarian program ever done. I mean, what that has accomplished in Africa is remarkable. There's 1.4 million people living in Kenya with HIV. And when they don't get their retrovirals, it's going to be a big problem because they are all suppressed right now. Hunger and famine relief is still a big challenge, particularly in the refugee camps. Because of what's going on in Somalia and Sudan, they've been flooded by more refugees from Somalia and Sudan. So I'm very concerned about what has happened here. And what I don't think this administration completely understands is the role of USAID in America's leadership throughout the world. Now, I would tell you, I think USAID could be more efficient and more effective and more focused. So it's not the what that they were trying to do. I have to say, I think it's the how. It was brutal. I mean, who says we're going to put USAID people through the wood chipper? Who says that? And so I'm pretty concerned. And I was there, I was back in Kenya in February and met with the senior leaders of the USAID team and also the team in Kenya. And they're just devastated. I mean, they don't even know what to do. They were all ordered to come home, but they couldn't come home because there was no one to call to book their airline tickets and get their goods moved. So it's a pretty, I think, very worrisome program. And what I'll tell you, one other thing is when USAID announced all these cuts and what was going on, when I was back for 2 weeks, I spent a couple hours with the president, and he said, Meg, after USAID was cut, about a week later, I got a call from President Xi of China asking if I would like to come to a state dinner in Beijing. So they understand the opening here, and they are moving in a big way. We moved them out, and they're now moving back in.
Ambassador Gilmore.
Hey, I'm unmuted. That's great. Meg,
Yes,
thank you very much
You
for
care to
coming
turn
on
on your
board.
video?
Oh, I don't think I see the video.
Okay, that's okay. He can say it. That's fine.
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Oh, now
James.
you muted yourself.
Now you're on mute.
Oh, very
Okay.
good. Am I there now? I think
Yes,
I'm
go
getting
ahead.
You are
You're
there.
good.
I'm getting there. Technology. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, here I am. Meg, thank you very much for coming on board. We're very grateful for your presentation because it resonates with a lot of things that we're doing. I can be heard. Is that correct?
You can, and
Yeah.
you can be seen.
I should have put on a tie. Okay. Listen, there are two things. First of all, I just finished an op-ed piece which was published on Newsmax newsletter in support of the USAID program as a part of our soft power, which is the point that you just made. So maybe, Gracie, I can get that out to our members here. But the question is a little different, very direct, Meg. Why aren't you in Kenya now? When I was at OSCE and President Biden came in, he fired every Republican worldwide, including me. And I don't resent that because that's part of the game. But my question is that what happened to you, or why aren't you in Kenya now?
No, so we were all asked to submit our resignation.
Yes,
So we weren't fired, but we were asked to submit our resignation.
same thing.
And so I basically said, you know what, it's time to go. I loved Kenya. I would still be there. I think if Kamala had won. I don't want to make this political at all, but I can't work for President Trump. And so I said, you know what, life is too short. I don't agree with the approach. And so I thought it was best for me to leave. I think if you maybe can't support the president, it's a bit of a challenge, particularly as a political appointee. So that's why we came home when we did. But I think I
Okay.
still be there under a different president.
Okay, and when I was at Vienna, I was asked to submit a letter of resignation, which I didn't want to do, but I thought that it was expected, so I did it, and you accepted or you didn't. So, okay, that's good information. I appreciate your response,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for your leadership.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Grace, do we have any other questions from the floor? Or I certainly have a question or two for Ambassador Whitman.
I don't see any additional questions at this time, but please feel free to use the Q&A button that's at
Well,
the bottom of your screen.
well, let me invite you, Ambassador Whitman, to expand on something you mentioned at the beginning, and that Ambassador Bliss's question, evoked a little more about from you, and that is Chinese influence. When you arrived in Kenya, what would you say was kind of the state of Chinese efforts to insinuate themselves in Kenya and neighbors, and how do you see that influence? Well, you gave the vignette, of course, of the instant invitation to the state dinner from Xi Jinping, but to President Kenyatta. But are there other ways you see China insinuating its influence in Kenya and its near neighbors?
Sure, sure. Well, I think anyone on this call who has served in Africa understand that Africa has been a priority for China for 2 decades. Something called their Belt and Road Initiative, which we understood very well as business people. And if you take a country like Kenya and many of the other major countries, the Chinese have built most of the infrastructure in Kenya. For those of you who have been, there's the brand new ring road from the airport to downtown. There's roads, there's bridges, there's hospitals. All of them have been built with Chinese money. Now, by the way, these were not grants to Kenya. They were loans that need to be paid back. And of course, what happened when one of the things I learned, which I didn't quite understand, is when we raise interest rates in the United States because we see inflation as we did after COVID, we get a head cold, maybe a slight dip in economic growth. Okay, a country like Kenya gets the flu on, an IV in the ICU. I mean, this is devastating for these countries because they get a risk premium on top of a risk premium on top of a risk premium. And so they were rolling debt at 16% at the height of interest rates. When I got there, 21% of Kenya's budget went to debt, principal and interest payments. Today, it's 49%. So this is an enormous burden. Actually, sorry, it's 59%. This is an enormous burden for a country like Kenya. And part of that, but not all of it, part of 15% of their debt is Chinese debt, but it is all floating rate. And guess what? That debt is secured by some very important assets in Kenya. So they pay that Chinese debt every single time without fail because of how it's been securitized. So that's a big challenge. But the Chinese are very well connected there. They have an embassy in Nairobi that's about the same size as the American embassy. And here's the story that they tell, which I got permission from the State Department to go to the Chinese National Day. I thought this would be a good thing to do. And so I was invited. And so I sent home back to the desk and they said, yes, of course you can go. Be careful what you say and all this. So I went. And I have to say, I was amazed. Every single senior person in the Kenyan government was there. You know how there's always a chief guest from the host country? Our chief guest was C.S. Mudavadi, who is the number 2 in the government there. Guess who was the chief guest at the Chinese? Mudavadi, right? Mm-hmm. And the pitch by the Chinese was, hey, love America, it's all good, but can I tell you what? We were the poorest country practically in the world in 1949, and now we're the second largest country in the world, and it could be you if you adopted the Chinese system. A little more lengthy and eloquent than that, but that was the message. And I got to say, it was pretty compelling to a lot of the Kenyans because they're like, gosh, 1949 to now, that's amazing. And, as you know, Kenya was probably the same size as China or a little bit bigger in 1949. And look at what has happened. So they are everywhere there. But what they don't do is they don't do humanitarian aid and they don't do military aid, at least not at this juncture. But they're starting. They were, wanting to build an airfield up near Lamu, near Manda Bay, where we have 900 military people. So they're moving out from their typical comfort zone. Now, they're not building as much infrastructure as they used to because they have their own set of financial constraints. But they, as I said, half the battle in life is showing up. And they showed up and they've been showing up for 20 years. We sort of showed up probably the last 5 years in a big way. Maybe some of you who served in other places would say it was longer, probably 5 years in Kenya. And we worked really hard in the great power competition. And we were making huge progress. And I'm afraid we've, going to take a big step back here on the continent. Now, why does China care about the continent? Rare earth minerals, population, 1/3 of working age people in the world are going to be on the continent, as I said, in 2050. So they want to be there and they want to be the major influence.
Fascinating. Other questions from our participants? Yes, Ambassador Gilmore.
Okay. I don't want to monopolize things here, but Meg, this is just too good an opportunity for me to pass up.
Okay.
Look, I want to react to what you said with respect to the Chinese message to Kenya. Yeah, they've risen fast since 1949, but they really picked up their momentum when Nixon and Kissinger opened up the relationship, and they've exploited the American relationship, economic relationship with the United States. That's largely the reason why they've risen in the first place. I personally believe that the attitude of the Chinese today is a betrayal of the American good faith effort to build that relationship and to hopefully develop a friend in China. That has failed. My question to you is, what is your attitude today towards the Chinese? I see them as adversaries. Do you share that view, or do you have a different view?
No, I share that view. I think they were on a different path, actually, for many years. And by the way, every American tech company, by the way, so many American companies have their supply chains in China. Up until 2022, HP had almost 100% of their supply chain in China. Let's pause on that one for a moment. But I think now they are adversaries and they have caught up to us in many, many ways. Largely, I mean, not largely, but in part from stealing our IP. No question about it. In tech, they have stolen a lot of IP. But what I will say is this is a very industrious country. I've never seen people work so hard. And the innovation, they've always been a follower, and the innovation there is quite remarkable. But I think they are an adversary in the great power competition. And we need to now take that very seriously, which I think Biden and others before him did. But I can tell you, the other thing that's very at work on the continent is BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China. Many African countries have joined BRICS because of what they've said and what they potentially offer. Now, the president of Kenya has not joined BRICS. He was, and I think still is, all in with America, but we're making it hard for him to be all in America. So I agree with what you say. I would say this is an adversary today, for sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
If nobody else has a question right now, I'll offer another one.
Sure.
The embassy, Ambassador Whitman, that you were in is, I mean, the physical building was the product of, one of the world's most spectacular acts of terrorism against any diplomatic establishment, especially an American diplomatic establishment almost 30 years ago. And all that, though that attack, as I recall, was linked to forces linked to Al-Qaeda, Kenya also had its own domestic terrorism problem, which when my wife and I and others of our neighbors were traveling in Kenya and Tanzania a few years ago, we experienced the differential, if you would, in domestic security at the airports, at the borders, as a legacy of that terrorism problem. Uh, is has that problem been licked now, and what is the sort of security status of Kenya
Yeah.
nowadays?
Yeah. So no, it has not been licked. Requires constant vigilance. Now, what you have to remember is Kenya is sort of an island of stability in a really tough neighborhood. I mean, this is not a great neighborhood, right? You've got Somalia, which is the home of Al-Shabaab, which is the largest Al-Qaeda affiliate in the world with about $135 million budget every year. And how do they get that money? They've taken over services that the government of Somalia should have been able to do: water, power, etc. And the situation in Somalia is very, very bad. And so if you're a man with a family and you can't get water, you can't get electricity, you don't have enough food, and Al-Shabaab comes knocking and says, "Hey, we've got a job for you," you say yes. And so Al-Shabaab is a very real threat, and constant incursions and threats into Kenya. And for those of you who supervised our intelligence services in your roles, you know that you pretty much know everything about what is happening, and it's frightening, honestly. Sudan used to be a real country, has been devolved into civil war with these two Sudanese generals basically devastating the population. There'll probably be close to 7 million people with food insecurity at the end of this year. South Sudan is unstable. Ethiopia used to be a real country. Now they've devolved into civil war. The Congo is a real challenge, huge Chinese influence, but now Rwanda is funding M23 and creating a civil war there on the border. So it's an island of stability in a very tough neighborhood, and the terrorist threat is real. Now, I would say that they have done a good job, and we, helping them, have done a very good job of sharing intelligence. And knock on wood, there hasn't been another terrorist attack of any scale in a number of years. I think the last was the Dusit Hotel or Garissa University. But every day, this is a real threat. And that is why we have 900 Marines in Manda Bay, which is on the border of Kenya and Somalia. And I'm telling you, they do a remarkable job. The cooperation between our DoD and their DoD is real, and also the cooperation of the intelligence services. But this is one of President Ruto's biggest concerns. He said to me when I first got here, he goes, "Meg, this is existential to us. This can destroy everything that we have tried to build in Kenya. And so we really need your help." And every time we had Lloyd Austin come, we had AFRICOM, the head of AFRICOM, General Langley, come, and this was a very important cooperation between these two countries. Now, guess what? What does Al-Shabaab want to do? In addition to, create instability in Kenya, they want to kill Americans everywhere. And so it is in our interest, in my view, to be helpful to any country that is trying to fight the terrorist threat that Kenya is trying to fight. And they're really the only ones in East Africa who have the wherewithal to do it. I've got great hope for Tanzania with the new female president there. But right now, this whole thing lies with Kenya and the help from the United States.
Interesting. I see that Ambassador Bliss has another question.
Great.
Yes, I have two unrelated questions. The first one is, could you say a little bit about the politics of Kenya? For example, there's a history of violence after elections there, and then there have been protests against President Ruto about some of his, I guess, tax policies and so forth.
Yep.
Recently, how stable is the political system, and is there an opposition party with much strength there? That's the first question. The unrelated question is, I flew into Nairobi last year, and the pilot told us if we have any plastic bags in our suitcases, we should leave them on the plane because we could be seriously fined if we brought any plastic into Kenya. So I guess my question is, of course, the UN Environmental Agency is located in Kenya. They seem to be taking a pretty strong position on environmental issues. Perhaps we could learn something from that in the United States.
Good. Thank you for the question. So the politics in Kenya, like many countries in Africa is complicated. So as you know, the former president was President Uhuru Kenyatta, who was the son of Jomo Kenyatta, who was the founder of Kenya, hence the name. And Uhuru was president for 10 years. His deputy was vice president at that point, Ruto. And they had formed an alliance. But the last part of Kenyatta's tenure was very fraught because he knew that President Ruto was probably going to run after he was done. And they ended up with a big split. In fact, I don't think that Kenyatta and Ruto talked to each other for much of the last 3 years of Kenyatta's term. And then, in a remarkable turn of events, Kenyatta decided to, after President Ruto had decided to run for president, Kenyatta endorsed his opponent, Raila Odinga, who was from a different party. I mean, it would almost be like if President Biden had endorsed J.D. Vance. And it was like earth-shattering. And at that juncture, I think President Ruto thought he would lose because with the Kenyatta endorsement, Kenyatta is a Kikuyu. The tribes are still very powerful. I think he thought he would lose. But he is a fantastic politician and was out and about for 3 years, basically campaigning. And he won in actually the freest, fairest election probably in Kenyan history, although I got criticized for saying that. I didn't say it. I said most people think that. But anyway, and we had lots of election observers. They do something very interesting in Kenya. They upload every ballot to the internet. And so there's real-time counting. And all like IRL and all those companies, we all came out with the exact same count. And he won, not by a lot, but he won by 200,000 votes roughly. And there was shockingly, a peaceful transfer of power. Because you're right, in 2008, 2009, I think 1,000 people lost their lives. It has been marred by violence. This was a very peaceful transition. Kenyatta was gracious, handed over the golden orb at this ceremony, and everything seemed to be going fine. 6 months later, Raila Odinga takes to the street, as he has in the past. This is the 5th election that Raila has lost. And so they had some sort of skirmishes that next summer, and then sort of it all calmed down. And then summer of 2024, there was a reaction to his tax policy. And frankly, I think the lack of excellent execution there. And the youth took to the streets. And there was not a lot of deaths, but there was a lot of violence and destruction of property. And in these countries, when there's a burning tire in the middle of Nairobi, it looks like the whole city's on fire. But it was very serious. And he reacted in a way that I was disappointed in. And I counseled him on this. His instinctual reaction was to clamp down with NIS, which is the National Intelligence Service. Arrest people, put them in jail, threaten. It was a sort of a classic African dictator response to a demonstration. And it didn't start out that way. His first thing was, I admire the young people. I admire Gen Z. Their issues are right. And then he got, I think, concerned, and then he cracked down. And I talked to him about this, and I said, Mr. President, this is not the right way to go. You said yourself that they are on the right issues. So why don't you address those issues? And he said, Meg, have you noticed that there's a whole raft of coups across the belt of Africa? And these guys wanted to come to State House. I had to think very hard. Did I want to bring the military out to protect State House? I understand what that means. I understand it's not the right thing to do in a democracy. But if they'd gotten to State House, they would have gotten to me, and there could have been a coup in Kenya. So I think he overreacted to this, but he was, honest to God, he was scared. And so my view is that, that he has a similar point of view to many of these African presidents, which is their hold on power is quite tenuous. So he made some concessions. He actually fired his whole cabinet and replaced them. He did some things, and things have calmed down. I think calmed down because people are scared, and calmed down because of the things that he has done. But he's got a challenge on his hands. He's got unemployment. He's got a tax policy. Now, I understand what he was trying to do. 16% of Kenya's GDP is collected in taxes. In more modern countries, it's 23, 24, 25%. But he didn't sort of escalate this in a way that was palatable to people. So I think he's got, he's got issues on his plate. And I'm in some ways very sorry that he reacted the way he did to the protests. I think we made some progress. I think there were some things that he backed off of because of what we said, but he's got some issues there. So do you have a follow-up question to that before I go to plastics and UNEP?
That covers it well.
Yeah. I mean, he has an African dictator streak, right? They all do. And so it's a challenge. Now, plastic, yes, they are. He is what part of what President Ruto wants as his legacy is conservation. Remember, 10% of the GDP of Kenya is tourism. He understands that conservation, working against to mitigate climate change, is absolutely crucial. And so he has put a ban, as has Rwanda and other countries, against plastics, plastic bags, plastic bottles. When you go to a game camp in Kenya, you don't get plastic bottles of water, you get metal bottles of water. And they're very serious about recycling plastic that exists in the economy. There's a great company there called Mr. Green that recycles plastic at a scale I've never seen. It's unbelievable. And there's a couple of knock-on companies that are doing a remarkable job there, but they're very serious about it. And they're very serious about conservation. Remember, this president, first of all, he's wicked smart. Second of all, he's a scientist. He has a PhD in ecology and biology from the University of Nairobi. And so he, like, actually talking to him is like talking to someone who I would have known in my previous career, which is very left brain, highly analytic, data driven. And he understands the threat that this is not only to the Kenyan landscape, but actually to his oceans, on the Indian Ocean there. And I would say that the UN Environmental Protection Group there is strong, but I think this is more driven by the president and his cabinet than it is by UNEP. This is my personal point of view. I don't know if UNEP would say that, but I think that's correct. Thank you for the question.
Other questions from our audience? If not, I've got one, Meg, that ties back to what you were saying about terrorism, domestic security,
Yep.
and the seriousness with which the Kenyans take this. Kenya, I'm not entirely sure whether this is their generous volunteering or whether it's something they were kind of cajoled or maneuvered into, but they're the mainstay of the latest effort to bring some order out of the chaos in Haiti.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, Kenyans' experience with their own domestic security challenges, I mean, equips them with, I'm sure, some capable forces and some capable leaders in that context. But at the same time, it's obviously a burden. At least a burden in terms of personnel. Anyone with a brain and eyes realizes that it is risky from the standpoint of sheer, the danger of sheer futility.
Yep.
And of course, anything that results in casualties or that sort of thing can become a domestic political issue. And you were just talking about President Ruto's insecurities. So can you tell us a little bit more about how Kenya's opportunity here to step up and play a big country role in a major UN, I guess we could call it peacekeeping exercise or peace restoring exercise, how that might play out for Kenya domestically and otherwise?
Mm-hmm. So let me tell you how this came about. First of all, Kenya has a quite excellent police force, particularly their elite police force, which I would sort of akin to the Green Beret in some ways. They have a very sophisticated section of the police that are very good at what they do. Actually, I was accompanied by a member of the former administration who came to Kenya. And the two of us actually went to President Ruto and asked him if he would lead the mission to Haiti. And interestingly, immediately he said, yes, I will do that. And here's why he did. He said, these are our African brothers in a different part of the world, and we should do everything we can to help them secure their country. He was very aware of the problems. He knows that Haiti's been a mess for 117 years. But he said, if we can be of some help and service here, he wanted to be. I also think he wanted to work with the United States government. He was, and I believe still is, all in with America. He said, "Man, I don't understand why these African presidents think they're going to get anything from Russia. Russia has the GDP of Italy. And we have to, we are the sort of leader of a democratic initiative on the continent, and we're all in with you." So I think that was part of it. And so but he said, "I can't pay for this, right? I can't pay for the MRAPs. I can't pay for the munitions. I can't pay for the weapons. I cannot pay to get folks there. I cannot pay them. And I need the US and the UN to shoulder that financial burden." He was very clear up front. And he said, "I just don't have that was when interest rates were rolling at 16%. He said, "I just don't have the financials. I have the people, but I do not have the financial wherewithal." So Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, and his team, and DoD said, "We will provide the in-kind. We'll set up the forward operating base there. We will provide the MRAPs and the helicopters and all the things that you need. We'll provide the food, the housing, and we will get donations from other countries." Some of you may know that those donations from other countries were quite limited. If it wasn't for our friend Canada, who gave, I think, the biggest amount, we would have been left with that whole thing. The challenge for him is we did not deliver. As the United States government, we did not deliver. And as a new Foreign Service officer, I was appalled. I was like, how can you say you're going to do all these things for a country like Kenya when they are going to send their people to Haiti and then not do it? Because they're there. And so my personal point of view, this was not our finest hour. We did not do what we said we would do, but they have made do. And I think have basically, I don't know that they've made a lot of progress against the gangs, but they have kept the gangs from getting more powerful there. And this ultimately has to turn into a UN peacekeeping operation, because it's not a peacekeeping operation today. It has to turn into that over time. And eventually, some of the burden has to be shared. And so the president is very committed. They have lost one police officer, which was devastating to them, but it's not like they've lost 200 or 100. And he's still, as I understand it, quite committed to this, but is quite concerned about the resources that have been needed and are going to be needed as they stay in Kenya. So I think we should be, given that this was a priority of the last administration, we should be very pleased that he said he would. And I think we should be embarrassed that we didn't live up to our financial support for the mission.
Other questions? We're getting close to the end of our time with Ambassador Whitman, who's been very generous, both with her time and expertise and insight. And so if no one else has one, I have one that ties to what we were just discussing. During our brief exposure to East Africa a few years ago, one of my British colleagues traveling with us made the point that Kenya has been, for all of the eruptions around election time and things of that sort, it's been a relative island of stability in Africa. And in contrast to Julius Nyerere's government in neighboring Tanzania, as Tanzania got launched into independence, it chose the other course, not African socialism, but respect for private property and kind of a capitalist model with government not playing such a completely dominant or controlling role, which suggests that Kenya has the potential for regional leadership or a bigger role in regional leadership. Now, a minute ago, you were talking about how unpromising the region is around Kenya. So you could answer this question with a very short, what is there to lead?
Yeah.
But why doesn't, or what is the potential for Kenya to exercise a larger leadership role in East Africa or Africa generally?
So I think this current president and Uhuru Kenyatta before him, to be fair, has tried to exercise a leadership role. They have tried to broker the peace agreement between, with our help, by the way, between the two Sudanese generals who are destroying Sudan. They have tried to head off at the pass a very difficult transition from the current head of South Sudan to something better. they've tried to work with Ethiopia and Somalia. As you know, Ethiopia tried to grab Somaliland and access to the port. They were a broker in that sort of standstill. And with our help, and this is very important, the president said to me one day, he said, Meg, because I ended up being able to advise him on some other issues beyond economic growth and development and humanitarian, in fact, regional peace and security. And he said, Meg, America's going to take a lot of grief. You always take a lot of grief because people love to hate the winner. But we cannot do this without you in Africa. We cannot do it. We need your support. We need your envoys. We need your diplomatic skills and chops, if you will. And we have been beside him on every single one, sometimes at the front, sometimes sitting way back. But Special Envoy Mike Hammer, for example, was extraordinarily helpful in some of these skirmishes. And he has good relationships with these presidents, like Salva Kiir in Sudan, like Paul Kagame in Rwanda. He's been very helpful trying to solve the M23 crisis. But I would say the success has been a B. It could have been a lot worse. That's not a great argument. It could have been worse, but it could have been worse. But he has tried to exercise a leadership role. The thing you need to remember in African politics is seniority is super important. Age is super important. And the person who has the most seniority is Museveni in Uganda. He's been president for 37 years or something. And I'll tell you a very interesting story. At President Ruto's inauguration, the diplomatic community was invited. Okay, this went on for like 8 hours. But he makes a few opening remarks, President Ruto, and then asks about 9 African presidents to speak at his inauguration. And the number one speaker and the first speaker was Museveni from Uganda, because he is the dean of African presidents. I mean, it was fascinating. It'd be like, President Biden asked like the president of Canada and Mexico to come speak. And yet that is the sign of the hierarchy of African politics. So Museveni has been helpful to some degree, although he's really, I think, aging out. And remember, Ruto's the junior president of African countries. So he's working on this. I think he is very well respected. He likes it. He understands the existential threat to his country. And he also is we've got to do better as Africa. But so I'd say he's tried very hard with a lot of our help, and frankly, a lot of help from the Norwegians. And as many of you know, the Nordic countries are quite powerful in some of these various countries. And I would say right now it's a B. Could have been worse, but it's not better. So.
And Ambassador William Eco has a question for you.
Look
Bill?
who's here. Bill, how are you?
Hey, Meg, it's great to see you. I just wanted to pop in and say thank you. Both thank you for your service. You did a fabulous job, obviously, in Kenya. And thank you for doing this morning. This has been fascinating to listen to. It's terrific when you have someone, particularly like yourself, who crosses the aisle politically, one side to the other. And I think your politics are kind of centrist like mine. Yeah. And serves their country. And I think you did a terrific job. It's great to see you. And just wanted to say thanks.
Well, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, Bill and I went to school together many, many years ago. Let me conclude by thanking everyone who's on this call, and frankly, the Council of American Ambassadors. I don't think I understood, and you thought I would have. I was the CEO of 2 Fortune 50 companies, 3 actually. I don't think I understood what you all do and did in your host countries, and frankly, in many of you who it's your career as foreign service officers. And I just want to say thank you. The work that you do in America's interests, in the interest of the world, in interest of world peace and security, is truly remarkable. And I think it's a shame because I don't think the American people understand what you all do. And now I do. And I just want to thank you for what you have done with your careers. For those of you who are political appointees, what you gave up to go do your assignment, you made a difference, and you have made a difference to the world. And I just want to say thank you. And I don't think many Americans understand the role that America plays in the world. And it is absolutely essential, as the president of Kenya told me, it is absolutely essential, the role that we play. And I'm, very concerned that we will walk away from the role that we play. And yes, there are countries who don't like us, but as President Ruto said, we can't do it without you. So thank you to each and every one of you for your service and for what you have done for America.
Well, Meg, our thanks go out to you for taking your time today to share the time with us, to share your expertise, your insight, your experience in Kenya. This is something we all share. This is a very unique association of people who have held this unusual role, almost unique role for the United States, blessedly the most powerful
Yeah.
country, the most prominent country in the world, which adds an extra element, if you would, of uniqueness to the role.